Now to tonight's top story. Mental illness affects as much as 50% of the population in the United States at some point in their lifetime, and more than half of those people are never diagnosed.
So what happens when one of the undiagnosed applies to buy a gun? Well, news anchor Olivia Deas investigates how mental illness could be a loophole in the gun control system. In this Alabama News Network Extra, don't shoot.
Anyone who purchases a gun through a licensed gun dealer must go through an FBI background check. They're matched against a database of people deemed unfit to own a weapon: criminals, drug users, and the mentally ill. With mental illness extremely difficult to diagnose, there are many who fall through the cracks. Sandy Hook.
911, what's the location of the emergency?
Sandy Hook School. I think there's somebody shooting in here.
Well, I heard like 7 loud booms.
Aurora Theater shooting.
I've got a child victim. I need rescue at the back door of Theater 9 now.
South Carolina church shooting.
Confirmed it is a suspect from Charleston shooting.
All of the men in these mass shootings were later said to have suffered from mental illness. Indoor shooting complex owner Frank Manuel witnessed a shooting just like these in a church decades ago.
Mrs. King was killed in the Atlanta church where her son often preached and where her husband is still pastor.
Turns toward the congregation and starts screaming, "I'm taking over, I'm taking over." He reaches into his jacket, he pulls out 2 guns, one for each hand. He starts shooting into the congregation. He then turns to the organist and shoots the organist at point blank range.
The date was June 30th, 1974, and the woman shot was Alberta King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother.
I witnessed her and a deacon gunned down in church while praying.
The gunman was later diagnosed with severe mental illness and spent the rest of his life in prison.
And I dashed out the exit, and I just stood there for a second because my brain could not comprehend what I just saw.
ASU professor Dr. Ernest Blackshear is a practicing clinical psychologist in the Alabama Black Belt. He says part of the problem with the people who commit these heinous crimes, such as the shooting of Alberta King as well as others, is a lack of impulse control.
People who don't know how to resolve conflicts with their frontal lobe, which is higher order cognitive functioning, which doesn't fully develop till you're 25, and they're driven by impulses from the limbic system, then you're going to have a lot of shootings.
In 80% of the mass shootings in the past 5 years, the guns were obtained legally. That begs the question to a lot of mental health providers, should there be a bigger question about mental health? That's according to the Wall Street Journal.
So I think that our culture of medicine has overlooked mental illness, and because of that, we don't have an infrastructure that is designed to screen and to diagnose, and most people go underneath the radar.
Under the radar, and sometimes those guns fall straight into the hands of would-be criminals. FBI background checks look for if the person has ever been committed to an institution. However, mental illness can be very difficult to diagnose.
So it's difficult in the sense of the tools that we have. We have paper and pencil measures, and we ask you questions and we check boxes, and we get our diagnoses in that manner. And that is very primitive and crude compared to going into a CAT scan for a brain injury.
And according to the NRA, even if a diagnosis has taken place, the state sometimes fails to report it to the FBI.
The states oftentimes, or local jurisdictions, will have those records, and they're not getting inputted into that federal database, that National Instant Background Check System. So what we would like to see is more record sharing with the states.
With so many not being picked up by the background check, some say mandatory mental health evaluations as well as background checks are the answer, though those advocating for gun rights disagree.
I think constitutionally that's a hard argument to make because it's a fundamental constitutional right. The Second Amendment allows people to defend themselves, to bear arms. I don't think there's any other constitutional right that you would have to subject yourselves to some sort of a test for.
And what is the cost of a screening to a person? How are we violating their rights on this side of the scale versus how many lives we saved?
Is Bernie Sanders tough enough on guns?
No, not at all.
And that argument is ongoing, with some politicians even basing their policies on tighter gun control, such as universal background checks.
In every single one of these recent high-profile mass shootings, the gun was purchased legally, the individual went through a background check, So the background check system is failing us. We need to fix it before we expand it.
But for gun shop owners like Manuel, the issue will always hit closer to home.
All respective gun stores or range owners are very, very concerned about selling a gun to someone that might harm themselves or harm somebody else. I cannot stop them from buying a gun if they pass the FBI background check.
Dr. Blackshear tells me in many cases, those who are mentally ill and obtain a gun legally are very good at not exhibiting the signs of a mentally ill person, making them even more difficult to diagnose. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Olivia. Now, researchers say, on average, a mass shooting takes place every 2 weeks in the United States. Now, while they attract a lot of media attention, only 1% of the overall shooting deaths in the U.S. are actually classified as taking place in a mass shooting.